going on, everyone? How's everybody doing out in internet land? What I've got on the bench today is a already partially, I haven't even put in all the accessories yet, but most of you guys would recognize this as an MN99s. This is the newer version with upgraded electronics, the 270 motor, 260 motor, excuse me. And this, of course, is a WPL C24, C14 really, I think, no, C24. And it, of course, has had all the bells and whistles put underneath, which I think am going to put over on the underside of this. Basically, I want to do a component swap of everything. I do recognize that the axles are a little bit narrower than what comes on the MN series stuff, but I think I'm willing to deal with some of the aftermath of that. You know, it really doesn't matter to me because I'm going to use these same tires on these axles, and then I'll continue to use these tires on this truck with these axles, I think, anyway. I did try these out and they didn't work nearly as well as what I thought, so there's a chance these would actually stay on these axles and make it over onto this truck, which would look a little weird. And then there's also the chance that I could really try and go totally scale and use these as well, but I just think those would look a little too small for my personal preferences. But and plus these aren't the kit tires, and so they have a little bit of firmness to them that just doesn't, they're not as good as what they could be for crawling. These things are just incredibly soft. I really like how these articulate. So do these. These really work very, very well with just mushing right over stuff and grabbing right on for traction. Anyway, I know that I've got my whole challenges ahead of me. I think I've seen enough reviews and I've worked enough on this truck to know what lies ahead. And it's a lot of screwing and unscrewing and a lot of just sitting and scratching my head wondering if it's going to work. I think it will. I think everything is going to be okay. I'm not 100% convinced yet that it all will work and work easily for a couple of different reasons. But, you know, the geometry really what is something that kind of concerns me a little bit. And it's that if you look at the underside of these, it might kind of be hard to sort of point out at this point right now. But basically, the way the frame rails come up where the top of the shocks mount is actually raises up considerably more than what these do. It kind of brings it up to a point where if you see where this top is mounted here on this, the rail on this MN would actually come up and sort of be parallel with this top mount if you were to kind of put these side by side. So I'm semi-thinking that if I take the shocks and put them onto this chassis, and if I take these shocks and put them onto this chassis, swap basically everything over, I would almost be able to get this thing back to pretty much just about original state with these shocks, drivetrain, everything, motor and stuff like that. And I'll leave this one kind of as is and leave it be. And I might even go ahead and put, you know, these wheels back on it and just call it good. And also too, I think with a little bit of extra width that comes on these axles, it might do these tires, wheels and tires, a little bit of good to give it a little more stability. I had stopped using these because these things just, you know, you get it on any side hill and it just falls right over. So, you know, I wanted to switch to these, and I've been using these for, you know, a week or two now, and I really like how these perform. They make the truck, you know, regardless of whether anybody likes how these look on the WPLs, these are such nice tires. They grab onto anything. They're super pliable. I'm not using any foams in them at all. They totally support the weight of the vehicle, and they run. They run really well. So anyway, yeah, my thought would be to bounce everything over, and I wanted to do so before I got totally into this vehicle, I guess, just kind of in the way that it sits. I really wouldn't want to run this much. After running something like this, after it's fully modified, it's hard to run some of these stock, you know, because they're loose, they're flimsy, and they have their unique things about them. But, you know, personally speaking, I kind of like the little bit more rugged nature of this. You know, this thing really has proven itself to me at this point that it's really a very capable truck, and I've got a rock pile out back that it seems to handle very well. I've got a farmer's field out back behind me that has, you know, some pretty deep puddles and some, you know, some random ruts and stuff like that. That this thing just motors right through it now with a 370 motor and the lower ratio gearbox and different tires and stuff. So I think this is basically how I want my crawler slash trail truck to run. but I want this appearance, you know, this Defender D90 style. And so I'm going to go ahead and build this thing up with all of the components from here. I'm not going to video the whole thing. I don't think that that's necessary anyway. Just watch me spill some stuff over if you want. That's no problem. I can video that all day long. Yeah, so that's why I'm not going to run the camera. I'm basically just going to go ahead and swap these parts over, and I think what will come out of it in the end is going to be a pretty neat vehicle. This thing arrived, unfortunately, with a broken front bumper. The mounts that hold it on were completely smashed into. There's 4 pieces here. I think there's one more piece laying around here somewhere that I'm not exactly sure where it went, but I can't mount this right now. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to get around that. And I'm wondering if bouncing chassis or anything over... Well, I keep the same frame rails on this, so I mean, I guess I'm kind of stuck as far as that goes. This thing sits in the back end. It's really, really saggy in the back. And I'm not... One of my biggest things about trucks and stuff like that, or just vehicles in general, is if your suspension can't carry your vehicle as it sits just parked, it's not going to do anything out on the trail. So my goal would be to try and get this thing not lifted, but just essentially utilizing its ground clearance and making it sit a little bit better and looking a little bit more capable. So I want to be able to provide a suspension, a system of being able to carry this thing substantially without faltering at every turn or running the risk of just essentially just tipping itself over just because it's got really, really loose shock action. And I like that. It carries itself well, but that's unfortunately that's just not realistic. That's a little too loose, and like I say, it sags a little too much in the back end for me. If it were sitting a little bit higher up, maybe about 1/4 inch or so, full centimeter higher, then I might be okay with that. And people say maybe I could just take the springs off of here and kind of stretch them out a little bit and kind of add a little bit of tension to maybe some part of the mid part of the coil, so it has like a progressive type of spring to it where it stays loose at the top but tighter towards the middle. I could try that, but I don't necessarily think that I want to try and gain that much performance out of plastic suspension. I will say, noted, metal axles, I've already popped these open, metal axles, metal gears inside, so I was very pleased to see that. One thing I'm a little disappointed by, it's very well made, I must say. MN does a great job of putting these together, but with all of the other ones that are out there, you have the option of being able to remove these drive shafts and swap them over. I have not looked yet, but I think that these are glued right inside the shaft, and so you will most likely destroy these things removing them, and then I'm not sure if there's flat spots milled into them in order to be able to to put anything back on them, to hold the rub screw or not. So my thought would be, I'm going to take the drivetrain, the shocks, the links, and everything off of this as it sits. I'm just going to swap it over to the other machine. Oh, one thing I'll probably have to do, or not probably, but I will be doing, these don't come with windows on the sides like the Fate-Es do. And I haven't even looked to see if those windows are interchangeable or not. They may be. I haven't looked. I'm about to double check that, but I would believe that they're not. And no, they're not. You could look at the tops of these. One roof is considerably longer than the other, but this has windows. It's kind of nice. It is a touch that I would say, if MN wanted to ever incorporate that into their D90s, they could do that. These things are fun. This is about the MN99, of course, but this is what the Fate-E 0003 FY 0003A looks like, pretty much, after it's been run a couple times. The only thing I've done to it so far was just put metal drive shafts in it, and this is a zippy little machine, but it's just got motor-driven steering, and it is terrible. Alright, so that's this segment. I'm going to go ahead and cut the camera, and I'm going to start pulling these things apart and see what I can do to them. Look at this pile of parts. So, this is the MN99s chassis, and I've completely hacked it all up here. That's obviously the links and stuff. So what I've done, I'm using the stock servo in this. It's basically I would say it's the exact same thing as a WPL. It's probably the same strength and everything. One thing I'm noticing I'll have to do right away is fully modify the trays, meaning that I'll have to cut away these posts that are right here on the sides in order to be able to make way for the screw heads that are going to hold the angle, the brackets on for the shock towers. So that's kind of one of those things, like once you go this route, you can't go back. And so that kind of makes it a little more of a commitment, I guess. It's kind of a bummer to do it that way. I would probably prefer maybe to swap some stuff over, but this body component right here is actually necessary to hold the top of, or at least the chassis and everything together. I guess I could try to see if it would work. I just hesitate because I feel like I'm going to run into a couple problems if I try and not use this, if I want to try and use the old stuff off the WPL. And this is where the challenges come. See, just to point out the difference here too in the lengths of the servo horn. So since this is a longer servo horn, what I'll end up doing is I'll use this top position on this, and I'll probably have to take my Dremel and take some of the backside of this away just to make sure that it's thin enough to ride over the top of the steering mechanism. And then one thing I can do is also just take off this hole right on the very end and just leave nothing but that exposed. And that was more than sufficient. I'll just have to run a nut and bolt through that in order to be able to make that up, and that should work just fine. Alright, challenges by the minute. So I just popped this in here and I realized that the width of everything up here around the top of the servo is going to be a little too wide unless I plan on cutting some of this away right off the bat. And I kind of want to avoid doing that, but I think I'm going to have to anyway. So what I do have is from my Red Cat Gen 8, a similar type of horn that I may or may not be able to get on here. I noticed that these ones that have the teeth on them need to be very specifically set up. I hesitate to use a plastic servo horn because I feel like that's just going to break very quickly, and I already see signs of stress, on the ends of the plastic here. It's turning white. So that means, as soon as a screw is put through that, it automatically, begins to separate and break the plastic. So that's a part just simply waiting to fail. If you want these to last a while, you want them to last, more than just a week or two, you need to begin to swap over metal parts for these types of things. And I really appreciate these because they have a top and bottom cam locking screw which clamps down over the top of the servo, central servo shaft itself. Which once you put that on there and you tighten both of those screws down as well as the main set screw in the front, that just simply doesn't go anywhere. So in order to continue to use that, it might actually require really truly switching things over, which, like I said, I don't want to do, but maybe it would be the right thing to do. It would certainly save having to cut a bunch of things from the chassis, but the problem being I still need to get this securely attached, that has 4 screws which hold the front on, and then I need these 2 screw positions. I would only have one if I brought my homemade bracket over from the other side and utilize that. I suppose I could make another bracket for here, which would certainly solve a lot of problems. It's not impossible to do. It's just a little bit more modification I was kind of in than I would have wanted to be in for. Okay, a couple of differences in these chassis to point out right off the bat. As you can see, if we mount, or if we hold these where the top of the shock points are equal with each other, you'll see that the WPL, the tail of this one ends slightly before the end of the MN chassis. Now out front, the MN chassis is a little bit longer there as well. So in short, what you've got are frame rails that are different length. And then also too, as I was mentioning earlier, you have a much taller architecture here between these particular mount points and where the top of the shock sits in relation to on this versus this. If you were to put these two side by side, you'd see that it's kind of hard to hold it, but you get about 1 centimeter to 2 centimeters difference, maybe a quarter to almost a half inch of height difference in terms of how these sit. So, and then I'll also have the option of switching back to this exact configuration as it sits, even if after building this and not being happy with how this thing handles. this is a really heavy body compared to what the this thing sits on top of a chassis. And I was already noticing that this really suffers because the weight of the motor just adds a ton of extra weight to this, and then you add the axles and stuff like that, and you're really talking about a ton of extra weight. So it'll be interesting to see how it compensates for that with everything sitting on here with a heavier body. So there's just a lot of challenges facing me on this whole thing, and it's just a matter of a decision to either do it or just say, you know what, I don't care. I should just run this WPL the way that it is and be happy with it, and then maybe when the white one shows up, switch it over and call this good and leave these MN99s totally stock, along with the FAE totally stock as well. But I don't know. It's a really tough decision. I really wanted this Defender to be what this thing is, and it's just going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort to get it there. So, decisions. Okay, chassis is built, and I can honestly say that I am more pleased with how this turned out in a matter of, this took me 4 hours to do. I started on this at 1:30. But basically I'm more happy with how this has turned out with just switching everything over to the MN chassis. Versus using the WPL chassis. No offense to WPL whatsoever. There's so much WPL on this. This is now a WPL MN, I guess, if you want to say it. But now I've basically hybridized everything from underneath. So this is all WPL upgrade, plus a 370 motor with a transfer case, and then MN electronics and MN chassis. Batteries are aftermarket, and MN tires and wheels. So this is going to go back on here in a second, but I wanted to fire this up and just sort of test it out. And I'm very happy with how everything has turned out so far. The responsiveness to everything, it's now got, it's kind of got everything that I was kind of hoping that the C14 was going to have. It's just got a little bit more punch. I like how it rolls. It's much more responsive. It seems to handle climbing things. It's got much more ground clearance. It's amazing how much more ground clearance these tires actually give. I mean, I can put my whole arm underneath this, and pretty much drive right over it if I want to. So this thing's definitely, it's got oomph, and I'm really excited to put the body back on it and see how it all looks when it, because I know it's sitting a little bit higher because I didn't use my my homemade shock tower mounts, these guys right here. I kind of felt like it was just a little too much, and I didn't want the geometry that affected by us, and this really kind of seemed like it was going to actually work out just about right. So it may be sitting a couple millimeters higher, but overall I am totally satisfied. Another thing I'd like to point out too is I had to do no modification to the servo horn on this one. Everything, even totally stock, shocks, stuffed all the way up in there. I'm not touching anything. I've got good articulation from side to side. This is not a crawler, this is a trail truck, and this is really kind of what I wanted from the beginning. It's got the ability to crawl, but it's really a trail runner, I think it should traverse up and down some hills pretty easily. I still think I need to adjust the links to get everything running totally smoothly and perfectly, but for all it's worth right now, I am super happy with how this just turned out. So yeah, all things considered, I couldn't be more pleased. I was a little curious of how it was going to work.